Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back again to another episode of As I Live and Grieve. So happy to be with you today. And yes, another great guest. I never disappoint, do I? But before I introduce her, I just want to ask you again for a favor. Some of you are doing it, and I get really excited when I see it happen. On Facebook, there is a page called As I Live and Grieve, and it's just a group of us that get together. It's not a place with a lot of messages, a lot of posts, so it's not intrusive in your day. You won't have a lot of notifications, but it's just a place that you can talk about something. Sometimes I'll post a graphic. Lately, I've been posting a myth of grief and just asking, you think this is true or is it not true? And getting some interaction that way. So it'd be great if you would pop over and just join us, follow the page, and even if you want to tell your friends to do the same. So with me today is Dr. Kimberly Harms. Now, I'll let her take the doctor off and introduce herself however she wants. But Kim, thanks so much for joining me today. Would you tell our guests a little bit about yourself, please?
Yes, and certainly you could take the doctor off. I'm a retired dentist now, so once you retire, we could take all those things off. It doesn't really make much of a difference, does it? But I'm someone who has been around the block, I guess, in life quite a bit, and I'm 67. So I'm, those of us who are in our 70s and 80s and 90s, we know that there's a lot of stuff happens. A lot of stuff happens when you have more years to live. Either you die early and you have very little grief, or you die late and you have to see everybody else go in front of you.
That's right.
So I'm in that, 70-ish area. I like to call us perennials. So, there's a lot of names for our group.
That makes it sound like a flower.
Yes, it's a flower. We're flowering. We're flowering now. Even all the stuff that happens to us, we're coming back. We're like a weed. We're like a weed. You can't get us down. So I'm a weed, perennial weed. But I was my story gets a little complicated. But when I was born with just 7 fingers. My mother took some thalidomide before she had me. It wasn't approved in this country yet. A friend of hers gave, as they did back in the 50s. Friend of hers whose brother was studying it gave it to her while she was pregnant with me going across country. No one knew about thalidomide at the time, or that it would cause loss of arms and legs and fingers. So I was really very lucky until about 1962. And by that time, my parents were divorced and living with my mother, who was an amazing, wonderful, loving, she was bipolar. She was the best mom.
Wow.
Best mom. And my father called her up and said, we just heard about this thalidomide drug. You caused Kim to miss her fingers. And my mom, who was fragile, already went right into the institution, the Cincinnati Mental Health Institution. And we were picked up by her dad and taken away. She got out 3 months later and said, Bob, I want the kids. And he said, nope, we already bought the furniture. You're not getting it back. And she went back for the rest of her life. And eventually, when I was 17, took her own life.
Oh, dear.
So we lost my mother to suicide. And, I think there is a myth out there that people who are mentally ill are not good parents.
Yeah.
Well, with few exceptions, she was the best mother I could ever ask for. She was the best. That was my first grieving was at 6 when I lost her the first time. And then again at 17, that was a big loss. And I suffer depression. Mm-hmm. Went through a period there. At that point, I know what it's like to be in that state. So then I met my husband, Jim. He wanted to be a dentist. And I thought, boy, maybe this is the 70s. If he wants to be a dentist, maybe I should be a dentist too, and then he'll marry me.
Oh, there you go.
This was my plan. That's how we thought back in
Sure, we
days.
did.
So I said, okay, yeah, let's do that. And of course, I forgot that I only had 7 fingers, and that might be a problem. But it turned out not to be. I ended up going to dental school. Never was a problem. I practiced for 30 years until my other hand gave out, and I had to stop. But never had lots of patients. It never was a problem. So wonderful marriage. We had 3 kids. We were rolling along in Farmington, Minnesota, leading the good life. And my husband came down with liver cancer. And of course, what you do when you have cancer is you go look online to see what are the chances. Because they won't tell you. The doctors don't say, they don't want to say anything, but you go online. And I kept checking all the different lines. Mayo Clinic said like maybe 5 years or less, very, very unlikely he'll live beyond that. And I went to another one. They all said the same thing. So I had to kind of grieve for my husband. However, a miracle occurred and he ended up with a liver transplant 6 months later, which saved his life. So he now is doing better. On the other hand, I had this had three wonderful kids, and my youngest son, Eric, was this absolutely brilliant. He was his freshman year at Columbia University. He was a National Merit Scholar. He played in the jazz band. He was a jazz pianist, and he did plays with Barnard College, and he was elected to student government at Columbia University.
Wow.
And he was on the dean's list in engineering. Just this guy that everything, like a golden boy, right?
Sure.
Until his girlfriend broke up with him. And 45 minutes later, he was gone.
45 minutes.
45 minutes. That same impulsiveness that made him such a great jazz pianist.
Yeah.
Because jazz people are very impulsive.
Yep.
That same impulsiveness and a 19-year-old brain that wasn't fully developed in critical thinking that doesn't get developed in young people till they're 25. It was a fatal combination, and he was gone, just from the top of the world to gone.
Yep.
So you can imagine, my husband had just had a liver transplant 6 months before. We went through. Anybody listening to a grieving podcast will know that you're at the bottom of that grief pit. I was at the bottom with maybe one nostril trying to work my way out. And someone did something for me that I will be forever grateful. It was a few weeks after we lost our son, and we were just getting back to work, and we were still in that the zombie phase, I call it, which I can last a long time. Where you're just going through, you kind of have a fake smile, and you kind of try to get through life, and you're just a zombie. You're just dead on the inside, and that's kind of where we were. And it's kind of hard to go back to I feel like dentistry. Where
it is.
People don't want zombies drilling on their teeth.
No, they don't. No.
So you had to kind of try to fake it. It was a tough time. And I came out of my office that afternoon, and my husband was standing next to his car with his cousin. And his cousin had lost his brother at about 19. He had gotten drunk. His friends had put him in the car and left him there overnight, but it was Minnesota and it was -5 and he froze to death. And he lost his brother, but he also lost his parents at the same time because they were so caught down in the grief pit, which is where you get sent when something like this happens.
Absolutely.
That they could never parent him again. They just couldn't get out of it. And so he came over to me, and here I am, the zombie grieving parent. He came up to me, wagging his finger in my face and said, "Kim," with kind of anger in his voice, "don't you ever let those other two girls feel they are not enough." And I can't even say that without getting goosebumps still, because that changed my life. Now, there are not many people that can say something like that. You have to have been in that grief pit yourself to be able to say it. I mean, because are you judging me? Are you judging my grief and how I can admit? But it just hit me like a ton of bricks, because here's my husband who had just had a liver transplant. He was grieving. He was not strong. He was, I just wanted to keep him alive. And then I had these two daughters who just loved their brother so much. So that was the time when I really learned that grief is a battle, and I had to fight my way out. Now, I'm a Christian. I believe in God. And in my mind, the way that this helped me is I just said, you know what? Satan wants me down in that pit. He wants me way down the bottom. And you know what? If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be in this situation. So I'm going to fight my way out just to show him. Now,
I'll show him.
That doesn't work for everybody. But for me, it gave me a bad guy that could be a real bad guy.
Sure.
When you're grieving, nobody could, you have to learn how to deal with each other. My husband and I managed our grief completely differently.
Of course.
So for me, having that bad guy and being able to just I'm going to show you, I'm going to fight my way. And every day I fought and fought and fought and fought. And it might have taken maybe 10 years before I really got completely out. But, but I was getting there. I mean, I was like halfway out.
Right.
We all know who's been in that journey. I was kind of getting there.
Yeah.
But it took me about quite a long time. Then 3 years ago, I lost my husband, Jim, not to liver disease. He's was very proud to tell everyone that, his liver was doing well, and he thought we should be able to, donate it to someone else.
Again.
He thought it would be eternal.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They don't do it just one time. But, and he died of congestive heart failure.
Oh.
But his heart disease started right after my son died. And before he had his liver transplant, he was checked out as clean.
Well, sure. They wouldn't have done it. Yeah.
no liver for you. So so I believe he died of a broken heart in my mind.
Oh.
In my mind, I think that's what happened. So
Yeah.
he died just a few years ago. In the meantime, right after Eric, so those were my big losses, were the loss of people. I was a dentist, and I was practicing, and we had a very successful practice. But a year after Eric died, my other hand, my good hand, failed me. I had a radiculopathy, nerve damage in my other hand. So the doctor said, "Okay, you're done." I was a primary breadwinner.
Right.
Jim was not doing well. So then I had to face that. So what all those things were, I believe, in my life, or there were changes. They were like we just had an eclipse, a solar eclipse.
Right.
It's kind of like we had this eclipse, and then I was different. We had an eclipse, and then I was different. I was no longer a daughter when my mother died. My son died. I was no longer a mother of a son. My husband died. I'm no longer a wife.
Right.
When we stopped my practice, I was no longer a dentist. I couldn't make a really good living by using my hands.
Right.
So I learned over that time, and again, with my faith, I trust in God, and he's got a plan for me, and I wish he'd just tell me what it was and give me a list, but he doesn't work that way.
Right.
But through my faith, that helped me a lot. And I also, 2 days after my husband died, I had a woman friend of mine call and say, Kim, she's 84. She said, my friends are all losing their husbands. They're kind of dropping like flies all around me. And I want to start a women's support group, a widow support group. Would you like to join? This was 2 days after my husband died.
Oh, my goodness.
So I just got off a call earlier this morning. We've been meeting for 3 years, and it's been a lifesaver to be around other people, just like you are doing now.
Yes.
To hear other people's stories, to know that you're not alone.
Exactly.
And to know all the loneliness and the feelings that you have are not unique.
Right.
It's part of life.
Right.
So,
yes.
So that's my story.
Well, that is quite a grief pit. And, I'd probably heard that phrase before, but as you and I were introduced and you used that phrase in your background, in your story, I thought to myself, wow, it really is, because it's something that as you look around you in this pit of despair, of grief, you are convinced there is no way out.
Absolutely.
But there is. You just have to figure it out.
Right.
I want to go back to a minute to your cousin or whoever it was that was wagging his finger at you and offering you that perspective of never let your girls feel like they're not enough. That is such an incredible, insightful perspective. Now, I would think perhaps, and I've not been in this situation to be the mother of children who are grieving the loss of even a grandparent or a parent. So I've not experienced that. But just as I think about that scenario, I can imagine where it's important for the remaining parent, especially, to make sure that they support their kids as they grieve.
Yes.
But that particular perspective has never been on my mind. It is now, though, and it will continue to be, because it would be very easy for the girls in their grief, they're grieving the loss of their only brother, and watching you grieve and their father grieve. It would be very easy for them to start to get that concept, that perspective, that assumption that they aren't enough, that the loss of their brother was so great that they are no longer enough to make you happy. So that is an incredible insight. And I wanted to make sure our listeners caught that as well, because I think that is critical if you are supporting your kids, that along with just supporting their grief, giving them a safe place to talk and everything, let them know, show them, prove to them that they are still your children, and each one of them is enough, that that's not what your grief is about. So thank you for that. And thank your cousin, wherever that person may be. I think that's incredible. Now, you went on in some of the background you offered to me. You had some adventures. Was that part of your grief journey, or did that develop some other way? Tell us about that.
I did have some adventures. After Eric died, I was suddenly hit by the country of Rwanda. Now, I have to tell you, the only time I remember even hearing about Rwanda, it was back in 1994 when there was this horrific genocide there. It was on the news. But I was raising my kids. We're busy with our lives. I was busy raising my children. I was busy with my career. I thought, oh, how sad, how horrible. And then I went on to the next step, off to the dance recital, right? Sure. But after Eric died, I again, I'm a Christian. I feel God was hitting me a little bit, knocking me on the head a bit about Rwanda. The first time that happened, I was at a prayer breakfast and I was sitting next to a woman from Rwanda for the first time. And she had lost her family. She had lost her 2 children and her husband in the genocide. And she kind of described the horrific way that they were killed. She survived. But then she said, and this, this is as a grieving, when you're in that grief pit and you're still super zombie right now. I mean, it was just within a couple months. It was in that early stage. And I looked at her and I thought, well, wait a minute. She's smiling. She seems happy. How can she be that way? Because you look at the world like, how can anyone be happy?
Exactly.
Everything is ended. And she talked about her new family. She had married again and adopted children that were orphaned during the genocide, which is what they did in Rwanda. And I thought, wow, it just hit me like okay, maybe if she can be happy and she lost her entire family to this horrific genocide, maybe there's hope for me to be happy, because that's what you want in the grief pit. You want to be happy. You want out of the pit. You want to be happy. It doesn't look like it's possible when you're deep in the pit. Well, then again, about another week later, a woman gave me the audiobook Left to Tell by Immaculée Ilibigazi about the Rwandan genocide, where she was she and 8 other girls were in a tiny bathroom while the killers were running all around. The pastor had hidden them there and they were saved and were able to recover. And of course, she lost her entire family, everybody, and everything was burned. All the possessions were either taken or burned. So she was left with nothing. And she wrote this beautiful book. And so I read that book and I thought, wow, again, Rwanda shows us people that have been through these I lost one son and they lost their whole families. You can't really compare griefs, but you think, okay, how can they be smiling and, how can they have that joy? So then a couple of weeks later, I was sitting at lunch with a dear friend of mine. Her name is Pam Papastanek, and she was on the board of Books for Africa here, which is based here in Minneapolis. And she said, Kim, I went to Rwanda. I was there for a while before the genocide. I thought it would be good to bring libraries to Rwanda. So let's do a memorial library for Eric. She had that idea.
Nice.
Yes. Because he was a scholar. He would get books from libraries that were being tossed down. He loved the classic books. And he was a book collector, and he was just he loved classic books. And so that would be a very wonderful legacy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I said, yeah, okay. Thinking we do one library, and that would check that off my list. Right. Well, we went there, and when we went there, the people of Books for Africa said, the genocide's kind of a political topic. Maybe just don't really talk about it. It's probably not polite. And I was like, okay. But the genocide came to us. We ended up meeting people who talked about it and talked about how they healed and talked about how they moved forward. And I met, one of the groups we met was a collective of Tutsi women. There was the Hutus that were trying to kill off the Tutsis. Any moderate Hutu, if they decided they weren't going to kill the Tutsis, they'd be killed. I mean, it was like a just gang warfare. So in this village that we went to, there were the 2 groups, the Hutus and the Tutsis. The Tutsi women were widowed because the men were killed first. So men were all their husbands killed. The Hutu women, husbands had done the killing. But they were now widowed because their husbands were in jail. So they were kind of widowed by jail for 20 years. So they were this big group of women in a culture where the men did, they kind of, women did a lot of work, but, they were single again, single mothers. And the Tutsi women went to a priest and said, we need some help. And he said, you know what, I'm going to do some grief counseling for you. We're going to have some special programs we're going to set up. We're going to meet a couple times a week, and we're going to try to work together to figure out what we do. Well, the Hutu women said, well, we need help too, because we're also widows because our husbands are in jail. And he said, well, I'll help you too, but only if you come together and do it.
Oh, wow.
And so this is because we're talking to these women. So they came in and they said at first they sat on opposite sides.
I'll bet.
Yeah. They weren't going to talk to each other. But over time they realized, and this is such an important point, and I learned it so well, our commonalities are much, much stronger than the things that separate us.
Yes.
And they realized that their commonalities were stronger than, and this is death. I mean, this is your husband killed my husband.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But they started over time to work together. And by the time we got there, it was about 16 years later. They had been working together as a community to make money to help support each other.
My goodness.
And they kind of adopted, some of the Hutu women would adopt a widow, to come to their home for, to feel that they had a larger family. They became like a family. Yeah. I mean, how could this be? How could this be? It's like, you just killed my whole family. And it was brutal, absolutely horrific ways to kill people and rapes and all of that.
Absolutely.
How can you do that? And I looked at those two, and what they did for me is when I told them I was there to bring books in honor of my son that I had lost, when they found out I had lost a son, they surrounded me with just the greatest love I've ever felt. They just surrounded me and hugged me. We are so sorry about your son. We know how that feels. We are so sorry.
Oh my goodness.
So that community of grievers is so helpful. And so we now have 65 libraries and 320,000 books that we sent through. They're all over the country. I've been back a number of times.
Oh, wow.
But they were like my grief counselors.
Yeah.
And I think we need to learn from them that no matter what happens to us, I mean, even a genocide, you can rebuild your life.
Sure.
And they rebuilt their country. It's now Burundi, which is right below that country, went through a similar genocide, but didn't really have good leadership. And so they're still kind of in a mess.
Yeah.
Rwanda is one of the safest countries in Africa. In fact, it has the same State Department safety rating as Canada.
Oh,
so
my
I tell
goodness.
people, oh my gosh, you're going to Rwanda. It's scary. I said, no, if you go to,
it's like Canada.
You're not afraid to go to Rwanda. It's safer than Belgium or Germany or any other.
Oh my goodness. My goodness.
So, but they've rebuilt their country because they realize, again, kind of what we said before, they realized that if they did not learn to heal and come together and reconcile,
right.
The killers were put in jail for 20 years. So they did pay. If we don't realize that we have to do this country will our children were going to live through the same horrific things we did.
Right.
We need to do it for them.
Right.
And they did. And it's an absolutely amazing story about when you're talking about grieving. I don't think there's a better story in the world than looking at Rwanda and how they have.
That absolutely is correct. Now, I have to ask, what happened when the husbands got out of jail?
Well, when the husbands got out of jail, now this is interesting. When the husbands got out of jail, they have these things called the Gacacha courts. So in some of the libraries that through Books for Africa were able to do law libraries and talk to some of the lawyers there aren't enough to go around, certainly. So what happens is Rwanda is interesting in that every month you have a village meeting where you have to attend. Everybody has to attend.
Oh.
If you don't attend, you're fined. You have to have, or if you have an excuse, it's, okay, they'll check you off. But you have to go. It's mandatory. And then after you have the meeting, then you have to go clean up the village. So it's a very clean country. We're not allowed to bring paper bag, plastic bags or anything. It's a very clean country. But it gives that sense of community to the villages. Yes. So when somebody gets out of jail for murdering and they know exactly who they murdered, they come back to the Gacacha courts. The Gacacha courts are courts that are kind of held by the local governance, the local people. So they'll sit around and they'll say, okay, so what are you going to do? You killed, Mary's husband and her family. What are you going to do to help Mary out because you burned down her house? Oh. And that person might go back and build the house. So they have a specific program designed to reconcile that person to come back into the village.
Wow.
And that's what they do. And it was funny because when I was there in 2012, they were still in jail and they had pink jumpsuits and they would go out and they farm their own food. They grow their own food. So they would be out in the farms growing their food and then they'd come back and they'd walk along to go back to jail. Well, there would be like 30 guys in pink jumpsuits and they'd have sickles and machetes and all the things that they use to kill people.
Right?
Weapons of the genocide in their hands, 30 of them. On the right ahead of them and in the back of them, there was one guard with a rifle.
One guard?
Look at that. One guard. One in the front, one in the back. So 2 guards for 30 people. And I looked at that and I was talking to Father Remy, who was our guide. I said, oh my gosh, that looks so dangerous. They could kill him. And he looked at me just strangely. This just shows you a difference in our culture. He looked at me strangely and he said, well, no, they're not going to do that because where would they go? Their families would just send them back to jail. Everybody knows what's going on. They can't, so it's not only are they in jail, but everybody knows they're supposed to be in jail and their families support that and just, and then when they get out, then they're fine. But it was just, it's just such a cultural shift for me that the families of the accused would send them right back to jail.
And that they would be so compliant.
Yes. Yes, because they had been murdered.
Yeah,
it's 30 murderers in a row with the murder weapon. And
so now these two factions get along better. I mean,
yes, you're not allowed to say. Of course, people know, just as we all know, but you're not allowed to. It's illegal, I think, to define yourself as Hutu or Tutsi.
Okay.
before the genocide, that would appear on your identity card. And so it's illegal to do that. And they really, those village meetings really help to hash out a lot of this stuff so that small, groups are not going back and forth. It is more of the government is actually the very first government that was mostly women in the entire world because, the men were dead or in jail. Right. So, it was mostly women, and it continues to be a majority women controlled parliament. The leader is kind of has more power than what we're used to. And of course, there are people that criticize him. But I will tell you that the people that I know in Rwanda are grateful that they have those rules. Like you can't say you're Hutu or Tutsi or Twa. There was another, and they enforce that, and so I don't know if they enforce it maybe some more strongly than we would like to see. Yeah. But overall, the result is a safe country where I go, and I'm not Mr. Adventure Woman. I'm not very adventuresome, I guess. I go there by myself. And I get hotels by myself, and I travel around the country by myself, and I feel perfectly safe at all times.
Wow. I'm fascinated with other cultures, and I do love to travel. But that, to me, really sounds like a country that has learned a better way and is really working hard to instill that and make sure that its citizens feel that too and abide by it. So kudos to Rwanda. That's a great story. Now, are there any books that you would recommend about the genocide and this process that they have used? What book?
The book, Left to Tell by Immaculate Ilibigazi is a good story about Rwanda. It's with the actual genocide. Gosh, I don't know books. I kind of found out my information from just being there and talking to the lawyers and so on. But you can certainly, Gakacha is the name of the courts. You can certainly Google that or Google the information about the legal system in Rwanda. We have, I think we have 5 law libraries there now. We were able to.
That's exciting. That's exciting. And what a great legacy. We've done a couple of episodes about legacies, and I just think they are so great because everybody kind of chooses something different from, we've had pancakes for Roger, and we've had ice skating fundraisers and libraries in Rwanda. And I think this is just amazing that you can take a loss that is so devastating and turn it into something that is so helpful, so impactful, and so powerful that just says so much. What a great tribute. What a great tribute to your son.
Thank you.
Sadly, Kim, time goes too fast. But the reason we try to stick with 30 minutes is most of our listeners are listening on a commute, whether it's a commute to or from work, to or from taking kids to school, to sports activities, to dance or whatever. So we like to do these little snippets, and that's often why a lot of our guests come back a second time, because there's always more to tell. And I think in your stories especially, you have so much more to say to our listeners. So I'm going to first extend an offer to come back again. And
Absolutely.
We'll figure out those details later. But for right now, I want to do what I always do for our guests, and that's to turn the focus and the microphone over to you, let you have the floor, and let you speak directly to our guests. Let them know what you might offer them if they opt to reach out and connect with you. Just tell them anything you want them to know from you. So the floor is yours.
Well, I think the first thing, I'm 67 now, and I feel that, as I said before, God's not done with me yet. I think we have a purpose. I'm not one that, but I'm retired, but I'm not. This is kind of what I'm doing as a retiree. But I feel important as I'm retired, as I reach this point. I feel it's so critical that we understand that we have a legacy. We all have a legacy in what we do. And we're going to die. When my husband died, I saw my grandchildren suffer. When my husband died, my children. And there are things that we can do now to make their grief journey easier. Kind of you can't prevent grief completely, but you can maybe lessen it. And so I wrote a book. It's called Are You Ready? How to Build a Legacy to Die For. That's available on Amazon or Barnes & Noble by Dr. Kimberly Harms. That's how you look it up. And that really goes to focus on the things that we can be doing now, the legacies we can be living now, like love. It's the biggest one. In Rwanda, I was with a group of widows, and I was talking about this legacy issue. And they said, through an interpreter, they said that, they can't. They were all widowed during the genocide. They were very poor, so they really can't leave a legacy. And they happen to be Christian, So we share faith. And I said, well, who left the greatest legacy? And in our faith, it's Jesus. And I said, well, what legacy did he leave? How much money did he leave to anybody? And they're like, well, he didn't leave money. What did he leave? He left love, and so that's one that everyone can leave. Everyone can leave love. But education or learning to trust or hard work, learning all these things that we've learned over the years that we can hopefully impart to the next generation. And also to get our affairs in order, get that stuff done. I have a little book. We have a workbook in the back of the book that talks about how you build a legacy folder where you have all the stuff that you need in there. Your passwords, your titles to your car, all that stuff in your folder. So when I die, my kids they're going to open the folder, everything they need, my titles, my social security card, my marriage certificate, birth certificate, they got everything in that little folder, and it's going to make their journey easier when I go. And also I want to talk about legacy love letters, where we write them love letters that they open after we go. So I think that the one thing I'd like your listeners to just start to think about is what can they do now to show that they love their kids so much that they're going to prepare them for a time when they're gone. That's my focus as a retired dentist out there.
Yeah, and that's absolutely beautiful. I know my mother left a letter for me and then one for my brother, and I read it and I've reread it and reread it and reread it. And it just became so special to me. And I think about that now and I think, gosh, it must have been hard. And I just kind of discounted that. But now that I'm aging and I'm 73 now, I'm starting to think of those things. And at first I think, oh my gosh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Then I turn it around and I think, oh, but how did it make me feel?
Yes.
And don't I want my daughters to be able to have that same sense that, wow, mom loved me enough that she thought to do this so that I'd have it after she was gone. What an incredible gift. And I also remember my mother, who was the inveterate planner, went to a funeral home, picked out her own casket, paid for, planned her entire calling hours celebration, went to the church, planned her entire funeral, right down to what hymns were going to be played, and had it all laid out in a plan. And I used to criticize her because she would want to go over it with me every so often. And I didn't. That was when I was afraid to even think about death. It was not in my list of conversation topics. So I would avoid it. Yes.
We have checkoff lists for that.
Yes.
For your funeral, for your obituary, how to write your obituary,
Absolutely.
anything you want to do. You don't have to do everything. But,
yes.
But it's that checkoff list so we can just check that off and get ready.
Yes.
Ready.
But for all the criticism I had in my head and in my mind after she died, what an incredible gift that was. That all I had to do was go to the funeral home. And of course they had the file pulled out. And they said, this is what your mother had planned. And I think we made one change. She even made suggestions on who we could order flowers from. That was my mother. Okay. She did everything except pre-order them and pay the bill on that. But as I say, I laugh about it now. But at the time when I was just so distressed and I knew she was going to die, she was in her 90s and she was on hospice. And I knew the day was coming. It was close. It was inevitable. It wasn't a surprise. Yet that to me was one of the greatest gifts she ever gave me, was so that I didn't have to go through all of that myself at that time. So consider that, listeners. And I know the last thing you want to do when you're grieving a loss of someone you love, the last thing you want to do is think of things like that. But as you heal, put that on your list of things to take care of at some point. You will be satisfied. You'll have a sense of peace, I think, with yourself that you've done it and it's taken care of. And I know that for those you leave behind, they will be so, so appreciative that they can focus on their love for you at that time and not which coffin to buy or which service to have or anything like that. So, okay, off my soapbox, I guess.
Wait, can you sell my book for me?
I advocate for all of my guests, absolutely. And we will, of course, in the podcast notes, we will mention the title of her book, so it'll be easy to search for. We will give you her contact information that, if you want to reach out to her and tell her, that what you thought of what she said or ask any questions, you are free to do that. If for some reason you can't reach her, reach me and I will forward your information on. We always do that. And people do reach out sometimes afterward. And it's just such a special, special feeling when someone takes the time to come on and literally put their entire story out there for the world to hear, because they're doing it not because they just want to tell their story. They're doing it because they want you to know that somebody is thinking about the journey you're on, and somebody else can appreciate how very, very difficult that is. So we're hoping that all of this and all of the stories you hear on our podcast help you feel that A, you're not alone, that you're not abnormal, unusual, or crazy for what you're experiencing. That's all part of that nasty thing called grief. And there's just no way. And if you've had lots of loss in your life, and most of us had, think about it. Probably as a toddler, if I lost a stuffed animal, I probably grieved as a toddler. Even toddlers grieve. We're introduced to it early in life. We just don't talk about it. We don't acknowledge it. We don't work through those smaller, less critical types of grief. All of that, think of it for parenting skills even. That would help somebody when they got to be an adult and suffered grief. Okay, I'm going to be on another soapbox in a minute. So let's wind down. Again, thank you for listening today. Today we talked about many types of grief and being mired in that grief pit. Yet somehow, some way, Kim found a way out. She still grieves, and there may still be grief left in her lifetime, but she is better equipped, I believe, on how to handle it the next time because of the work she's done already, the inspiration she has found and now offers and willingly shares. She'll be back again. I just know it. Until then, please take care of yourselves and join us again next week as we all continue to live and grieve. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveandgrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.